Walking in sunlight all of my journey, over the mountains, through the deep vale. Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee, promise divine that never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, heavenly sunlight.
All right, we continue our series on effective Christianity. That's what it's all about. Not only being a Christian, but that term Christian is really loosely used, much more than it should be. But we want to be an effective Christian. We want to be a faithful Christian. We want to be the child of God that He would have us to be. And so we're talking about ways, things that are significant, things that are important, and some practical lessons to make sure that our Christianity is in fact effective. Tonight, we want to talk about fellowship, the importance of effective fellowship. Somebody tell us in your own words, if you're willing, what is fellowship? How would you define fellowship? Biblically speaking, of course. What do you think of when you think of fellowship? Sorry? Family. Good, I like that. Family, certainly. Spending time with family. We're going to talk more about that tonight. What else do you think of when you think of fellowship? Sorry?
Visiting together.
Visiting together. Excellent. Visiting together. Spending time together. Absolutely. Good. Learning more about each other. Learning more about one another. Good. All of those things are absolutely true, and hopefully we can build on that. Yes, ma'am?
And the church is eating and visiting.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right. We call those fellowship meals, don't we? We eat and visit. Everybody's got to eat. We might as well do that together, right? If we have opportunity, which we have plenty of those, even one coming this Sunday that we have. Let's talk about a few things regarding fellowship and build on some of the thoughts that you just brought out. First of all, I want to talk about the idea of the group mentality, what it means to think about how we should focus upon, how we should view church fellowship. Any of you, especially guys, ever been involved with a pickup basketball game? Or do you know what a pickup basketball game is? Nobody knows what that is? Okay, some hands. You're just not wanting to raise your hand. Okay, y'all know what that is. I remember in college, and you guys, everybody's been there, and you've done this, and you know we didn't do this often. I wasn't very good at basketball, but just for fun, we'd go to the basketball gym every now and then, and we would sit down, and it's not like there was a sign up. We just kind of understood that there was this rule that it was always 5-on-5, and the losing team would sit down, and 5 new players that were sitting there in line waiting would get up, and then they would try. And so we would join up with random guys, usually myself and my roommate. We'd go together. He was taller and actually good, so he kind of carried me through the game, helped me out a little bit. But we'd join up with 3 random guys, and we'd play a pickup game. And I want you to think about that mentality for a moment. We've got 3 random strangers we've never met in our lives. We're playing a game. We're on the same team. And for a few moments, we've got a goal together. We're unified in that we want to win this basketball game. And so we use one another, we pass the ball to each other, and we try to win. Usually, since I was on that team, that did not happen. But we tried nonetheless. That mentality sometimes happens in the Lord's body as well. That almost like it's a pickup game. Someone comes in and they're there for Sunday morning worship service, and that's it. They come in and they're there and they're using one another and they're involved with the worship, but then you go home, just like the end of a basketball game, you go home and you may or may not see those folks again. You might come back next week or a couple weeks later and you visit the gym again, and there might be some different folks there, might be the same folks, but you're not really interested in who's there, you're just interested in your goal. And that is to do something that you're wanting to do. Sometimes there's a pickup game almost mentality with worship. But probably more so where folks get into trouble is what I would call the workplace mentality. It goes a little further here. Now think about your work atmosphere. You've got a place where you go on a pretty regular basis. And you're involved with folks, but in that workplace, you've probably got some cliques. You've got some folks that you're a little closer to than others, but maybe more so than it should be. You kind of talk about that strange fella in the corner over there in that office. Nobody really gets along with him, and so you talk about him a little bit, and you at the end of the day you clock out and you're done with those folks, and you go home, and then you go back, and from 8 to 5 days a week or whatever your schedule is, you're around those folks, but outside of that, it's over. And when you retire, that's it, right? There's no more. And again, sometimes we might have a workplace mentality when it comes to fellowship. I'm going to be here for the services. I might be here on occasion, but there's just a couple of folks that I like to hang out with, and I'm just going to hang out with them. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with, everybody kind of gets along better with some folks than others. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking about, I'm just only going to hang out with these 3 or 4 people. Not going to hang out with anybody else, not going to fellowship with anyone else. In fact, we're going to kind of talk about the other folks in the congregation because we're the popular ones. That's not a problem here, but I've seen it before. I've seen it be a problem. And so you've got a workplace mentality. And once I leave the congregation and go home, that's it. I'll see them again on Wednesday night, but between Sunday and Wednesday, between Wednesday and Sunday, don't have anything to do with them. Not really thinking about them, not really interested in what's going on. And one day I may just desire to retire from it altogether. Right? Do you ever see some of those mentalities in the church? What should our mentality be about church and about opportunities to fellowship together, even outside of those services? Is that important? Those times of fellowship? It is. It is. Not that you can be at every event that ever takes place, not that you can always be involved, but to the best of your ability, as you have opportunity, when we can get together, that is so, so important. It's a lifelong commitment. Look at 1 John. I'm doing a lot of talking. Let's look at 1 John chapter 1 and make application of this. 1 John chapter 1. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? I can't tell if I'm coming through or not. Okay, good deal. 1 John chapter 1. Somebody that doesn't mind, read verse 7 for us.
But if we walk in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, His Son, cleanseth us from all sin.
Excellent. As we walk in the light, we have fellowship one with another. Do we have fellowship together when we're not physically around each other? We do, don't we? We do. In what sense does he mean we have fellowship together? How is it that even when we're not around each other, there's a sense in which we are in fellowship? Okay, good. You share those things in common. That's right. You're like-minded. Is that what you were going to say? Yeah, you're like-minded with those folks. You share. You think about your family, right? And as a church, we're a family. You are connected with your family even if you're not with them. They're your family. There's a connection there. You're always going to be related in that sense. But if we take this a step further and think about the physical times that we're together, what constitutes fellowship? For example, the most obvious, when we're in worship service, when we're here together, is this a time of fellowship? Absolutely. When we, on Sunday after the sermon, after the worship service is over, and we go back there and we have a meal together, is that a time of fellowship? Of course. Those are easy. What about this one? Is it a time of fellowship when someone has 4 or 5 members from the church over into their home, and they just, as a small group, get together and eat and spend time together? Is that fellowship? Of course it is. If just you and one other person from the congregation goes out and spends some time together, is that fellowship? Absolutely. All of that is included in this. All of that is so very important. But why is that? Why is fellowship, effective fellowship, so important in order to be an effective Christian? Before we look at the answers, what would you say to that? Why is effective fellowship so important in order to be an effective Christian? Mike?
We're supposed to love each other, and if you don't spend some time with them, it's hard to love them.
That's true. It's hard to love one another and be that family when you don't ever actually spend time together. Certainly true. Miss Renee? Right, recognizing each other as brothers and sisters in an eternal way. Absolutely. Miss Becker?
Having the fellowship, if you were faltering a little bit, you could call people and they would help prevent that.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. We're going to talk more about that too, that you're faltering, you're having a hard time, you can call someone and they can help you to get through that, to bring you back even if needed. Do you have a hand up? Yes, ma'am.
Wrong term guilty by association. So I'd always tell Jacob, don't be guilty by association. Those are people you hang out with.
Yes.
They will rub off on you. You will become part of that. You will be known by that.
That's exactly right.
As a Christian, we should become guilty by association.
That's right.
Those who we hang out with will rub off on us. Will be known by that. Will be known by what we do with them.
That's a good point. That concept of guilty by association, who you hang out with, they're going to rub off on you. And so if you're, in a good sense, guilty by association with Christians, you're guilty in the sense of guilty as a Christian, I guess you could put it that way. But in doing so, you are certainly going to have a better influence, which is going to lead you to make better decisions because you're in fellowship with other Christians. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
You should rub off on them rather than them rubbing off on you.
That's true. That's true. And that's why, Paul says in talking about it, we should always be influencing others positively.
I'm talking about the ones that aren't Christians that
Yes.
with. They should see a difference in you.
That's right. That's right. And if they don't, she's talking about, others that are not Christians need to see a difference in us. If they don't see that difference, and if we're not having a positive influence on them, what does that mean? Where's the problem lie? That's right, with me. It's me that's not being that good influence. But on the same token, you can't only socialize constantly with those in the world and not be in fellowship with Christians, or what's going to happen? A number of things. Discouragement. Yeah, you're gonna fall into the trap of being influenced by them instead of you influencing them. Right? So fellowship is so important. Anything else that you'd like to mention? Yes, sir.
Fellowship also is the idea of sharing similar attributes.
Yes.
Whether it's Christianity, pick up basketball, or whatever. And it's so important because unless, like Mike said, unless we are around each other, there's no way for us to know what we have in common.
That's right.
A good example of that is that we went to visit Sandy and Eva Bennett.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot about both of them now, much more than I would ever know about them just worshiping with them here at OceanSide.
Very true.
I know that Sandy loves model airplanes, and he's got a garage filled with model airplanes. And Eva loves dolls, and she's got a room full of dolls. So I know more about them now because
That's right.
I've been in their home than I would ever know just by sitting next to them at a pew.
That's right. Scariest room we've ever walked in, wasn't it? No. That's so true. You're going to get to know folks a lot better when you spend time with them outside of worship. And you think about that. Think about the folks that you've fellowshipped with outside of services. You know those people better than you do those who you simply chatted with a bit while being here. There's a lot of truth to that. And that's how you're going to get to know them. That's how you'll know what you share in common, which I'm glad you mentioned that. The very Greek word for fellowship means to share in common with. And so you begin to learn what you do share in common with other folks, even outside of your faith, but that being the most important. Also in fellowship, you're meeting one another's, hopefully, needs. But how can I know how to serve my brethren if I don't know what those needs are? And so in fellowship, I can learn those things as well. So the positives and the negatives can be learned. Let's go to Acts chapter 2 and build. All of these thoughts are spot on, and we'll just build on what's already been said. Acts chapter 2, again, just talking about why it's so important. And then we're going to make application as to how we can be better at fellowship. Acts 2, talking about fellowship. Right after we see some 3,000 souls added here at the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, when you get down to verse 42, you see that the disciples, those Christians, continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, the teaching, the fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. Looking at verse 46, when these new Christians, they just become Christians, how often were they in fellowship together according to verse 46? Daily. They continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house to eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. Why do you think they decided to be in fellowship? And I'm not saying from this we have to be in fellowship every day, but why did they decide as new Christians that they needed to fellowship together every single day?
Support in a very hostile environment.
That's right. It was a hostile environment. They had a support for one another. What was something we know that they did during this time? From day to day, what were some of the things they were doing together?
Eating.
They were eating together. They were sharing meals together. They were praying together. Sorry? Praising God. That's right. Praising God together. Singing, prayers, teaching. What was something that they were doing for one another? Because remember, a lot of them traveled from far away. They had not brought everything that they needed. They didn't expect to stay longer and become a Christian. They didn't see this coming. And so they didn't necessarily bring the means that they needed to be able to financially support themselves. So what do we see them doing during this time of fellowship to help each other out? They're sharing in that. They're sharing. Some of them even selling things that they have to help support one another financially. This is emphasis that they're placing on fellowship together. As new Christians, they knew that they needed that. They knew that they needed one another and that support and that fellowship. Now, what does that say to us today? What can we learn from that? Obviously, for a new Christian, what's going to be very important for a person that is a fairly new child of God? Fellowship, that's right. Being around brethren. What happens in the mind of Satan, not that we can just know his mind, but I think we can at least conclude this together. If you are in Satan's grasp for so many years and you decide to become a child of God, what has just happened as far as your relationship with Satan? It's ended. He's lost you. He's lost you. And so what is he naturally going to do at that moment in which you become a Christian? He's going to try to get you back. Remember, in order to get a break from Satan, as it were, the picture of getting him to kind of leave you alone for a period of time, what must you do? Resist him. You've got to resist him in order for him to flee from you, in order for him to give a break, as it were, in order for you to be able to push through that temptation. So when he nails this new Christian, which is what he's going to do, to immediately try to get that new Christian back, that new Christian needs fellowship. Now that's true for all Christians of all ages and all maturities, but especially true of a new Christian. So for an older Christian, does he or she need to some degree fellowship to continue to have that support? And of course we do. Of course we need that. And so we begin to see that even from these early disciples in Acts chapter 2. Look at Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18. You may be thinking, Dalton, this is obvious. Of course we need fellowship. This is very fundamental. But if the reality is, at any congregation, I'm not trying to pick on OceanSide, at any congregation that I've been to or that I've seen, you're going to see a massive, massive drop in the attendance of things that are involving fellowship versus things that involve worship. And so there is definitely a mentality in the Lord's body all over the world that fellowship is just not really that important, but worship is. Worship is very important, but fellowship is too, and it's not to be pushed to the side. Matthew chapter 18, look at verse 12. Matthew chapter 18, verse 12. Let's read it together. How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99, and goeth into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray? And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoices more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Ultimately being a picture of God, the great shepherd, and us being his sheep. And when you've got 100 sheep, and one of them, just one of them goes astray, what does the good shepherd do? He goes after, he leaves the 99 to go and to find that one. Notice he doesn't say, based upon how much I like that one sheep, or based upon how popular that one sheep is, based upon the age of that sheep and whether that age is a shut-in or a youth, or it doesn't matter. If one sheep goes astray, God loves all of those sheep the same, and He's going to go out, there's a beautiful picture there, and to get that sheep and to bring him back. Now, what is the lesson there for you and I? As we talk about fellowship and having a love for every member of this family at OceanSide. Every soul is important. Every one of them is. Question, when we get together and we have these times of fellowship, do you notice sometimes who's not there? When you have times of worship, we can make it even simpler. You notice who's not there. But if you're not here, how are you going to know who might need that help? Who might be that sheep that's gone astray that we need to go out and to get and to bring back, right? Fellowship can save souls at the end of the day. And so we need to have that care and love for one another. You know, OceanSide, there's a lot of congregations that really struggle with the cliques. We've seen them, and I mean this. I'm not just blowing smoke here, as they say. I mean it. We at OceanSide, I don't feel like that's really an issue, but we always need to continue to remember that and keep it that way, because cliques can occur so easily, and you get these little groups of folks, and you only see them spending time with each other and not anybody else, and you begin to lose that one unified flock mentality, and division there's a lot of issues that can come from that. And so that's one thing that is great here at OceanSide that we need to maintain. Any thoughts before I move on? Yes, sir.
That fellowship in Acts 2
yes.
Said that they had all things in common.
Yes.
And some have tried to make that mean communism, that they sold their possessions, and so the rich ought to sell theirs and give it to the poor so that everybody has everything in common.
Yes.
That is not what that's saying.
That's exactly right.
At all.
Yeah, that is not teaching that if you have more than somebody else, you're just obligated to give that, and so everybody has the exact same amount all the time, and this communist mentality, that's not at all what he's teaching. What is the lesson there? What's the message, the practical application that's legitimately to come from what's going on, Larry?
Well, in verse 45 it says, they distributed to every man as they had need.
That's right.
Not to make it equal among everybody.
Yes.
If they had a need, then they distributed to.
That's exactly right. It's about meeting those needs. Yes, ma'am?
Also in Acts 2, when it says they had favor with the people, so it also means that people on the outside look at us and see the fellowship that we have with one another. That's important too, not only for us, but for others to see us.
You're exactly right. Others see that fellowship. They see that joy. They see that family, that brotherhood. And I don't know about them, but I'd like to be a part of that. I would think they would want to be a part of that too and to have that. There's a lot of folks out there that need that fellowship and that love. And we have it, and sometimes we take that for granted sometimes, those opportunities that are so very important. I had another thought based on what you just said, and it just left me. Maybe it'll come back, but let's, any other thoughts on that? Let's keep going. Look at Proverbs chapter 29. Proverbs chapter 29. Somebody read Proverbs 29:20 when you get there. And I failed to mention, by the way, one of the most critical aspects of fellowship, and where I want to spend the remainder of our time and focus, is on communication. I put it up there, but I didn't mention it. Communication is so critical to fellowship. You can spend all the time in the world around one another, but if you're not communicating together, you're not learning what those needs are. You're not learning about that model airplane collection or that dog collection. You're not learning about what you have in common. You're missing out. Communication is critical, but quality communication is also necessary. Communication can really do harm, or it can do a lot of good. So Proverbs 29:20, somebody please read that for us.
Seest thou a man that is hasty in his word? There is more hope of a fool than of him.
Excellent. Hasty in words. If there's one thing where we are liable to get in trouble as human beings and as Christians, it's in our communication. Sometimes we speak before we what? We think. We speak before we think. If you were to name an apostle, the first apostle that jumps into your mind when you think of maybe speaking before they thought, who would you say? Peter, definitely Peter. It's natural. It's simple to do, especially when you've got that personality and you're driven and you've got things together and you just naturally want to just jump in there and say the first thing that comes to mind. But that's not always the way to do it. In fact, according to this proverb, by inspiration, Solomon says, there's more hope for who than for a person that hastily speaks? For a fool. That's pretty strong, isn't it? What would cause a Christian to speak before he thought? What kind of type of circumstances, to make this practical? Why would you do that? Why would you speak before you thought? Impulses, reactions. What's that? Ego-driven, that's right. Anger, that's a good one too. Ego-driven, anger, right? You're frustrated at somebody, your emotion is high, you might be tempted just to say what's on your mind. Is that ever wise? To speak when you're angry? Wrathful? Probably not, Larry.
I've always heard that people who say what they think better be careful what they think.
That's right. There's a lot of truth to that. People who speak their mind need to be careful what's in their mind, don't they? True or false, you always process here before it comes out here. It may happen really fast, but it always goes through this. Is there ever a time when you could honestly say, I said that and had no control over it? No. No matter how mad you get, did I say that right? Yeah. No matter how mad you become, you have control. Now, if you got so mad that you feel like you lost control, well, you let yourself get that mad so that you lost control. But somewhere in that picture, you made a poor decision if you let yourself speak too quickly due to anger. Yes, ma'am? That's right. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And that's why and not to get on too much of a side note here, but that's why we need to protect what enters into that mind, what we're watching, what we're listening to, who we're spending time with, and what's influencing the way that we think, because those thoughts are going to come out of our mouths. What else? A couple more I had in my mind. What are some other ways or circumstances that might cause you to speak before you think, to hinder your relationship with your brethren because you just spoke before you really should have? Yes, sir.
There's a proverb, I can't recall right now which one, but it says, "A fool uttereth all his mind."
Yes. Yep. True or false? Sometimes it's just best not to say it. It's true. It's just not always best. Remember that Rabbit and Bambi? What does he used to say, Thumper? If you don't have anything nice to say, how does it go? Don't say anything at all. There's some truth to that. Not just whether it's nice or not nice, but Mike?
Sometimes I think we think we're joking, and we say things that we think is a joke, but the person we're saying it to sometimes doesn't take it as a joke. And so then it's like, I've done that a few times. It's like, then you
Yes.
later you say, why did I have the dumb thing to say? I wasn't thinking about that person
Yes.
when I made the comment.
I'm so glad you brought that up. There's a lot of truth to that. We've all fell into that trap, and we say something that really is true, but we're kind of joking about it. But they know that it's true, and so there's a lot of ways that can be perceived, and we've got to be careful about that. Some of the things we joke about. Jinky.
Also heard the saying that it is better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt.
That's it. There's a lot of truth to that. I tried to repeat that, but I've already lost half of it. Better to not speak and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt, something like that. A lot of truth to that. Yes, sir. Mr. Burke?
The design that God developed us with was 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Mm-hmm.
We should listen more than we speak.
That's right.
Sometimes if you do that, you're better off.
James talks about that, doesn't he? Swift to hear and slow to speak. A lot of truth to that too. Proverbs 15, I don't think we've mentioned this one yet. Proverbs 15:28. I'm sorry, Miss Renee, yes. Yes. Okay. I had the same thing happen earlier. Just lost my train of thought. Proverbs 15:28. Proverbs 15:28. Kind of goes along with the ego-driven a little bit. Certainly could be part of it. The heart of the righteous studieth to answer, but the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things. What do you think of when you read that passage? The heart of the righteous studieth to answer. What does that mean?
Make sure you're right.
Okay, good. Speaking of ego-driven, you might have a situation where somebody asks you a question, and naturally you want to know the answer, you want to sound smart, you want to give them that information, but maybe you don't really know the answer. So what might you do? What would be the wrong thing to do in that circumstance? Especially when we're talking about the Bible. Just make up an answer. Just make up an answer that you think might be right? And mislead them. But the heart of the righteous studieth to answer. I really like that passage. One we don't reference very often. But the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things. I don't know exactly this is what Solomon was getting at, but just by way of application, if I teach them something that is not right, that is not true, would that be classified as an evil thing? Yes, it would. It would, wouldn't it? And that's a scary thought. I saw another hand or two over here, and I didn't mean to miss it. Did I get everybody? Okay, Miss Paul.
Say that last week at that debate we saw where somebody spoke quickly.
Oh, is that right?
We're not all billionaires, so we can't do it.
Nice.
But it did get him in trouble.
That's right. That's right. Can you think of an example, a quick Bible example of someone who spoke hastily and got into a little bit of trouble? Yes, ma'am.
Haman, was it Mordecai and Haman?
Yes.
And then he was quick to answer about what should be done to the person who exalted. And anyways,
That's exactly right. That's right. It came back to it. That's a good example. You remember that when Haman was quick to give an answer about what should happen to the one who was speaking out against, which turned out to be Mordecai. That's without going into that whole story. But what ultimately happened to Haman? Got hung on his own gallows. That's a great. I didn't think of him. That's a great example.
Well, Peter's another example.
Yep, that's who I was
He
thinking.
said, I'll never, everybody else may
Exactly.
forsake you, but I'll never.
I'll never forsake you. I'll never do it. You can even argue that when he denied Jesus, he kind of spoke quickly because it hits him. It's like it hadn't hit him in the moment. He was scared. He was fearful. He just spouted out what he thought. But after that moment, when he met those eyes of the Lord, when he looked at Christ and it all hit him, and he realized what he had just done, he had spoken way too fast out of fear.
I like the one, too, where Jesus says, I'm going to wash your feet. He goes, oh, no, you're not washing my feet.
He did.
And then Jesus rebuked him really severely, I suspect.
He did.
And it, again, that same look, I suspect, was there, maybe not quite as much as it was.
Yes. That's a good point. He was washing their feet, and Peter's the one that jumps, as usual. He speaks up, not me. You don't wash my feet, Lord. And Jesus basically tells him, if I don't wash your feet, you're not what? You got nothing to do with me. And then what's Peter say? Wash all of me. Please, Lord, just wash all of me. Then he just constantly just didn't learn, did he? We could talk about the garden too and the sword. And yes, sir. Can you be too zealous? That's a good question. Can you be too zealous? What do you think?
Yes.
Is that possible? Yes.
It happened to me before on baby daughter.
Is that right?
And, as a matter of fact, the lady that spoke this to me later when I obeyed the gospel was in the same congregation where she attended. She asked me where I was going to church, and I showed her the sign, and I was a Methodist, I was going to Methodist church. She said to me, you do know that if you don't know the Church of Christ, go to hell. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And I appreciate you telling me, but she lost me. I mean, she couldn't come back to me again.
Yeah, that sealed the deal, didn't it?
But not too long after then, a good, kind-hearted Christian approached me in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sat down, and after I had got the learning, then I could understand the statement.
Yes.
Earlier, but I don't think that's where you get it.
That's right. It wasn't that what she said was wrong, but that's not exactly what because people don't understand that. You have to teach them so they understand. I saw a hand back here first, Glenn.
How many preachers spend so much time preparing and doing things for the church and neglect their families? That's
right. That's a good point. Being overzealous in that sense. That's a very, very true point. Larry?
The topic, communication. Communication is one person sending a message and the other one receiving it and understanding.
Yes.
If they don't understand it, there's no communication.
That's a good point. It's certainly not quality communication, not communication at all. That's right. Didn't understand it. We're not effectively communicating in that sense. That's a good way to put it. Carlos?
Yeah, and to the original question, I think both Ananias and Sapphira, his wife, were good examples of this idea that you have to stop and think about what you're getting ready to say.
Yes.
They both, they sold the property, they held back the price, they conspired to do it. But in both cases, if both had just thought about their response to Peter, especially in the case of Sapphira, when he said, tell me, did you all sell this property for this money? If she had just said, you know what, we didn't. But she said the first thing what was she programmed herself to say.
Exactly.
I think that they both probably, I don't know that they could have, wouldn't have been held responsible for their sin of conspiring in the first place.
Right.
But the remedy for both of them may have been different if they had just pondered what they were going to say.
That's true. Ananias and Sapphira there. If they had pondered before just straight up lying. Even though they had predetermined they were going to do that, maybe the outcome could have been different if they had pondered that a little further and changed their mind in that moment. That's another great example. Was that a bell already? All right. Let me throw a couple of these up here. Obviously, part of that communication, part of fellowship is teaching. Well, not necessarily that you have to be a teacher or a preacher or an elder, but when you communicate together, I mean, how many times have you learned something from someone just kind of chatting about Bible things? I was studying from Esther the other day, and I came across where the king such and I never noticed that before. And you learn from one another. You teach each other. Maybe you're talking with someone about something that you did. I was in Walmart and somebody asked me. Somebody was trying to talk to me about where they went to church, and so I was able to change that conversation. And then you think, that's a really good idea. Next time somebody asks me, then I'll. Or maybe you learn that the best way to initiate an evangelistic opportunity is to ask them, where do you go to church, and tell me about that. And then you get to tell them whatever. You learn from each other. You communicate. And we don't have time to turn to these passages, but Ephesians 4:12 and following, Colossians 1:28, a couple of passages there where Paul's emphasizing the importance of edifying one another, of being teachers to one another. By the way, what does edify? We use that term a lot, but what does edify mean? When we say we edify, what do we mean by that? Build up. That's right. Educate, build up, mature is the idea. Going from a child. In fact, he says it in verse 14, that we be no more children, tossed to and fro with every slight wind or wave, that we are growing up and maturing in Christ. Encouraging one another, right? What is the difference between edifying and encouraging? Very, very similar terms. How would you separate the two? What do you think of when you think of encouragement? What makes it such a unique term? If you're encouraged, you're what? Yeah, exactly. You're motivated. You're pushing someone to do something. You're motivating, or as Hebrews 10:24 puts it, you're provoking them. You're provoking them to good works. Building up is you could say that's a motivator, but you're being built up. You're gaining knowledge. You're learning. You're becoming stronger. But encouraging is motivating someone to maybe take a step in a direction they haven't taken in a while, to make a change that they needed to make. You're provoking. Hebrews 10:24, provoking to love and good works. And then, of course, rebuking. This is one I had planned on spending a little more time on, but we talk about effective fellowship, effective communication. When our brothers and sisters are in sin, a good, godly Christian friend is going to do what? When you hear about that sin, when you know that they're in sin, rebuke them. What do we mean when we say rebuke? Does that mean you go up to them and how do you talk to somebody that you're rebuking? How do you speak to them? In love. In love. Galatians 6:1 says, restoring them with what? With what trait? In what? You remember? Brethren, if a man is overtaken in a fault, ye who are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness. Meekness. Meekness is powerful, but what? Sorry? Subtle. I like that. Subtle. It's under control. It has a boundary on it. You're keeping it under lock. You have an incredible power in the gospel, but you are using it appropriately. And of course, Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love. And that's kind of what Bill was just referencing earlier, speaking the truth in love, how we're talking to someone about the gospel. There's a way to say it and a way not to say it. Even speaking the truth, I've got to do that with love. And hopefully we're learning, as I am certainly together, what exactly that means to do so in love. Any last minute thoughts? I don't even know why I put discussion questions on here. We have so many questions and discussion as we go. We don't really need them anyways. But what? Any additional thoughts, questions, or concerns you might have? Yes, sir.
Fellowship in spirit. Just the idea, if you travel down the road and you're out of town and you say, there's a Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing is fellowshipping in spirit. You feel like you're a part of something greater. And I think it's a lot of quiet people,
yes.
can really have fellowship in spirit that way, I think.
That's a good point. I like that. 1 John 1:7 certainly kind of connects with that. You're driving down the road and you see a congregation and you know that that's part of your family. You've not even met them, but you're in fellowship with them in spirit. They're part of your family, and that's an incredible thing. All these folks we're going to meet one day in heaven, Lord willing, and be there for eternity, and all these strangers that are not strangers, they're family members, and we will meet them and get to know them, and that's an exciting thing. Thank you so much for your time on a fundamental study, but a significant one, and the importance of our fellowship together.